Los Angeles, spring 1967. A script lands on a desk at Solar Productions. It's called Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. Inside these pages is a role that will become legendary. A character so iconic that decades later, people will still quote his lines, the role of Sundance. And it's being offered to the biggest movie star in the world, Steve McQueen. He reads it. He wants it. His agent knows it's perfect. The studio is ready to pay whatever he asks. And then, without warning, McQueen walks away. For 50 years, Hollywood told a simple story about why he turned it down. Pride, ego, a billing dispute with Paul Newman. But that was a lie. A convenient cover for something far more painful. Something McQueen never wanted anyone to know. His manager kept the secret until his deathbed. And what he revealed changes everything we thought we knew about the king of cool. Here is the story. Hollywood in 1967 was a battlefield. The old guard was dying. The studio system that had controlled everything for 40 years was crumbling. In its place, a new breed of actor was emerging, dangerous, independent, real. And Steve McQueen was the most dangerous of them all. He didn't play by the rules. He didn't kiss the ring. He showed up on a motorcycle, demanded control over his films, and walked away from anything that smelled like compromise. The executives hated him. The audiences worshipped him. And every studio in town wanted him in their picture because McQueen meant one thing: money, box office gold. But here's what nobody saw. Behind that ice blue stare and that rebel exterior was a man at war with himself. A man who'd clawed his way out of reform school, out of poverty, out of a childhood so brutal it would have destroyed most people. McQueen didn't just act tough, he survived tough. And survival had taught him one unbreakable rule: never show weakness. Never let them see you hurt. Because the moment they know you're vulnerable, they'll destroy you. That fear lived in McQueen every single day of his life. It shaped every decision, every role, every relationship. And in the spring of 1967, that fear was about to cost him the role of his career. But here's what nobody knew at the time. McQueen wasn't just considering Butch Cassidy, he was desperate for it. He'd read the script 3 times in one night. He saw himself as Sundance instantly, the quiet gunslinger, the loyal partner, the man who said more with silence than most actors said with pages of dialogue. It was written for him. Or at least, it felt that way. His agent, Stan Kamen at William Morris, told him it was perfect. The director, George Roy Hill, wanted him. The studio, 20th Century Fox, was ready to make him the highest paid actor in Hollywood for this picture. Everything was aligned. But there was one problem, one name that changed everything: Paul Newman. Newman was already attached as Butch Cassidy, and Newman wasn't just another actor. He was McQueen's mirror, his equal, the only other star in Hollywood who commanded the same respect, the same power, the same box office numbers. They'd met a few years earlier. There was respect between them, but there was also something else: competition. Unspoken but razor sharp. Because in Hollywood, there's only room for one king at a time. And both men knew it. When McQueen heard Newman was playing Butch, something shifted inside him. Not jealousy exactly. Something deeper. Something that went back to those reform school days when survival meant never being second best. Never being the sidekick. Never being anyone's shadow. McQueen's manager, a tough, chain-smoking bulldog named Freddie Fields, saw it immediately. He'd managed McQueen for years. He knew the man's psychology better than anyone. And he knew what was about to happen. Fields pulled McQueen aside after one of their meetings about the script. The conversation lasted 3 hours. Most of it was Fields trying to talk sense into the most stubborn man in Hollywood. He laid out the facts. Newman's name comes first in the billing because Butch is the lead role. Sundance is the supporting character. That's just structure. That's storytelling. It doesn't mean McQueen is lesser. It doesn't mean he's playing second fiddle. Both roles are equal in screen time. Both men would share top billing. The movie would be marketed as Paul Newman and Steve McQueen. Two legends, equal power, equal pay. But McQueen couldn't hear it. Or maybe he heard it and couldn't accept it. Because for him, billing wasn't just about ego. It was about survival. It was about the message it sent to the world. Steve McQueen doesn't play second to anyone. The moment he accepted second billing, even in name only, he believed Hollywood would see him as weak, as declining, as yesterday's news. And in an industry that worships youth and power and momentum, perception is everything. Once they smell blood in the water, they move on to the next king. McQueen had seen it happen to others, Brando, Clift, even Bogart near the end. He swore it would never happen to him. Quick question, have you ever been so afraid of losing everything that you pushed away the very thing that could have saved you? That's what fear does. It makes you fight the wrong battles. McQueen was fighting a war that existed only in his mind, but to him it was life or death. Let us know in the comments if you've ever made a decision based on fear that you later regretted. The meetings continued for weeks, back and forth, scripts, lawyers, agents, everyone trying to find a compromise. The studio offered to make the billing simultaneous. Paul Newman and Steve McQueen on one side of the poster, Steve McQueen and Paul Newman on the other side. They'd alternate which name appeared first in different markets. It was an unprecedented deal, a Hollywood solution to an impossible problem. But McQueen still hesitated. Because deep down, he knew it wasn't really about billing. That was just the surface, the excuse, the rational explanation he could give the press without revealing the truth. The truth was far more painful, and it had nothing to do with Paul Newman. Years earlier, something had happened to McQueen that almost nobody knew about. In 1963, during the filming of The Great Escape, McQueen had a breakdown, not publicly, not in front of the crew, but privately, alone in his trailer between takes. Something inside him cracked. The pressure of being the biggest star in the world, the responsibility of carrying multi-million-dollar films on his shoulders, the constant scrutiny, the expectations, the need to always be Steve McQueen, the king of cool. Never showing fear, never showing doubt, it became unbearable. For 3 days, McQueen couldn't get out of bed. He told the production he had the flu. But his wife at the time, Neely, knew the truth. He was paralyzed by anxiety, by the terror that he wasn't good enough, that he'd be exposed as a fraud. That boy from the reform school who never should have made it this far. McQueen went to see a doctor quietly, not a psychiatrist, because that would have destroyed his career if word got out, but a general practitioner who prescribed him something to calm his nerves. The doctor told him something that stayed with McQueen for the rest of his life. You're afraid of success more than failure. Because failure, you understand, success means you have something to lose. Those words haunted him, because they were true. Every time McQueen reached a new height, every time he had everything he'd ever wanted, he'd sabotage it, push it away, destroy it before it could be taken from him. His marriages, his friendships, his health, and now potentially his career. That's what was really happening with Butch Cassidy. It wasn't about Newman. It wasn't about billing. It was about McQueen's primal fear that if he played Sundance, if he took what everyone agreed was a perfect role for him, something would go wrong. The movie would fail. He'd be blamed. Or worse, Newman would outshine him, and the world would see what McQueen believed deep down about himself, that he was never good enough, that he was always one mistake away from being that scared kid in reform school again, alone and worthless. The final meeting happened in late spring, May 1967, a conference room at 20th Century Fox. Present were McQueen, Freddie Fields, Stan Kamen, George Roy Hill, and two studio executives. They had a final offer on the table, $15 million for McQueen's participation. In 1967, that was an astronomical sum. Equal pay with Newman, alternating top billing, full approval over his wardrobe and some script input. Everything McQueen had ever demanded from a studio, they were giving him. George Roy Hill looked across the table at McQueen and said something that should have sealed the deal. "Steve, Sundance is the soul of this movie. He's the conscience. He's the one the audience will remember. This role will define your career." Silence. Pure silence. McQueen sat there, his face unreadable. That famous McQueen poker face that had served him in 100 films. Nobody in that room knew what he was thinking. Fields, who'd been preparing for this moment, who'd spent weeks trying to get McQueen to say yes, held his breath. 30 seconds passed, then a minute. McQueen finally spoke. 3 words. "I can't do it." The room exploded, not with anger, but with confusion. Fields immediately asked why. The executives started talking over each other, asking what more McQueen wanted. What would change his mind? Hill just stared at him, stunned. And McQueen stood up. He didn't explain, he didn't justify. He just said, "It's not right for me," and walked out of the room. Just like that. $15 million. The role of a lifetime. Gone. And nobody in that room understood why. Because McQueen never told them the real reason. He couldn't. Because admitting the truth meant admitting he was afraid. And Steve McQueen never admitted fear. Not to Hollywood. Not to anyone. Not even to himself. What happened next shocked everyone who knew him. McQueen didn't take another role for 6 months. He disappeared. Went racing, motorcycles in the desert, cars on closed tracks, risking his life at 150 miles an hour because that fear, the fear of speed and death, that he understood, that he could control, but the fear of vulnerability, of being second, of being exposed, that was a demon he couldn't outrun. His wife Nayla tried to talk to him about the decision. She knew he regretted it the moment he walked out of that room. She could see it in his eyes. But McQueen shut down. He told her it was a business decision, a smart move. He'd made the right call. But late at night, when he thought she was asleep, Nayla would hear him in the other room, pacing, drinking, replaying the decision in his mind, wondering if he'd just destroyed his own career out of pride and fear. Meanwhile, across town, Paul Newman got the news. McQueen was out. Newman's reaction? Disappointed. Not because he'd lost a co-star, but because he knew what the movie could have been with McQueen. Newman understood the chemistry they would have had on screen. 2 alphas, 2 kings, 2 men who didn't need to prove anything but would push each other to be better. He told George Roy Hill, "We just lost something special." Hill agreed, but the show had to go on. They needed a Sundance, and fast. Robert Redford wasn't anyone's first choice. He was young, relatively unknown, handsome, sure, but unproven in a role this size. Hill was skeptical. The studio was nervous. But they were out of options. They screen-tested Redford, and something clicked. Not the same energy McQueen would have brought. Redford was lighter, more boyish, less dangerous, but it worked. In fact, it worked better than anyone expected, because Redford's Sundance became the perfect counterbalance to Newman's Butch. Where McQueen would have been Newman's equal, Redford was his complement. The chemistry was different, but it was magic. The movie was released in 1969, and it became one of the biggest hits of all time, over $100 million at the box office. Multiple Academy Awards, a cultural phenomenon. The theme song, "Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head," was everywhere, and Robert Redford became a superstar overnight. The role that should have been Steve McQueen's launched another man into the stratosphere. And McQueen had to watch it happen, had to read the reviews praising the Newman-Redford chemistry, had to see Redford on magazine covers, being called the next big thing, had to live with the knowledge that he'd walked away from cinematic immortality because he was too afraid to share the screen. But here's what nobody knew at the time. Here's the secret that stayed buried for decades. McQueen didn't just turn down Butch Cassidy because of billing or ego. He turned it down because Freddie Fields told him to. Not directly, not in those words. But in that 3-hour conversation they'd had weeks before the final meeting, Fields had said something that planted a seed of doubt in McQueen's mind. Fields had said, "Steve, if you do this movie with Newman and it fails, they'll blame you. If it succeeds and Newman gets all the credit, they'll forget you. You're at the peak right now. Why risk it?" Fields thought he was protecting his client. He thought he was giving sound business advice. But what he was really doing was feeding McQueen's deepest fear. The fear that he wasn't enough, that playing Sundance was a risk he couldn't afford. Fields never forgave himself. In 1982, 15 years after McQueen turned down the role, Fields was diagnosed with cancer, terminal, 6 months to live. And in those final months, as he was putting his affairs in order, he told the truth to a journalist friend, off the record, not for publication while he was alive. He said, "I cost Steve McQueen his legacy. I gave him the excuse he needed to run away from greatness, and I've lived with that guilt every day since." The journalist honored Fields' request and didn't publish the story, but he kept the notes. And years later, after both Fields and McQueen were gone, the truth finally emerged. Some believe Fields was just trying to protect his client from a perceived risk. Others think he knew exactly what he was doing, feeding into McQueen's insecurity to maintain control over him. The truth? Probably somewhere in between. Fields loved McQueen like a son, but he also made millions off McQueen's career, and keeping McQueen insecure, keeping him dependent on Fields' advice, that was good for business. It's a dark truth about Hollywood. The people closest to you aren't always acting in your best interest. Sometimes they're acting in their own. And McQueen, for all his toughness and street smarts, was blind to it. Because Fields was one of the few people he trusted. And trust, for a man like McQueen, was everything. Steve McQueen went on to make great films. Bullet, The Thomas Crown Affair, Papillon, The Towering Inferno. He remained a huge star until his death in 1980. But he never made a film that reached the cultural impact of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, and those who knew him best say he never truly got over turning it down. His third wife, Barbara Minty, who was with him at the end, said McQueen talked about it in his final months. Not with regret exactly, but with a kind of wistful sadness. "I wonder what would have happened," he'd say, "if I'd just been brave enough to say yes." That's the real tragedy of Steve McQueen's story. Not that he turned down a role, not that he let fear win, but that he spent his entire life trying to prove he was fearless, when the truth was, he was terrified every single day. Terrified of failure, terrified of success, terrified of being seen for who he really was. A scared kid from a broken home who got lucky and famous, but never believed he deserved it. And that fear, that unhealed wound, cost him more than just a movie role. It cost him peace. It cost him the ability to enjoy his success. It cost him the chance to be vulnerable, to be real, to be more than the king of cool. McQueen once said in an interview late in his life, "The worst prison is the one you build for yourself." He was talking about his childhood in reform school. But he could have been talking about his entire career, because Steve McQueen was never truly free. Not from the studios, not from Hollywood, and not from himself. So here's the question for you. If you could go back and give Steve McQueen one piece of advice in that conference room in 1967, what would you tell him? Would you tell him to take the risk, to face the fear, to trust that he was good enough? Or would you understand why he walked away? Let us know in the comments. And while you're down there, tell us which untold Hollywood story we should cover next. The real reason Marlon Brando destroyed his own career? Or the secret Elizabeth Taylor kept until her death? And unfortunately, they don't make men like Steve McQueen anymore.